Welcome once again to this afternoon program about people of years ago who made Osterville the village it is today. Also, welcome to those who are on Zoom. I don't understand it, but my friend Jim, who lives in Florida in the winter and likes my fresh string beans in the summer months. Welcome, Jim. Have the seeds. I got the bean seeds already ready to plant in May. How many people here, how many people do you think lived in Osterville 167 years ago? Take a guess. How many people do you think lived in Osterville 167
1,800.
How many?
1,800. I said 500. She said 800.
Well, 167 years ago, there were 456 people. Now, I don't know whether that meant youngsters or not. That I don't know. 456 people. Osterville really didn't get discovered as a resort until after the Civil War, when the Weata waterfront became a very attractive area for people to go to the beach, and a lovely area. Most of the information about these folks has come by research, talking to family descendants, and I've mentioned this subject before, and a rich letter of 1877. This letter, which I have mentioned more than once, described Osterville and its people from about 1840 to 1877. Mrs. Rich goes back in her memory when she wrote the letter, as when she was a young girl, and describing all the different families that lived here in the village. I did see the original letter several times, but unfortunately, it has been lost. Just the way it is. All right, we'll start with the program. This is John Adams and wife. They lived on West Bay Road, right out here, just beyond the school that was taken down. That was all Adams' property in there. Some of the Colemans lived in that area, for Mrs. Coleman wasn't Adams. In my last talk, Mrs. Rich, I just told you who she was, in her letter of 1877, mentions the grandparents of this Mr. Adams. His name was Phineas. It's an old Bible name. Phineas Adams. They lived on East Bay Road, down beyond the town landing. So if you go down East Bay Road, you get maybe a half a mile down there on the left. There's a little town landing where you could put your sailboat in the summertime. Well, somewhere in that area, this Mr. Adams here, his grandfather lived, and Mrs. Rich mentions him in her letter. They lived on East Bay Road, this man's grandfather, beyond the town landing. In 1877, when Mrs. Rich wrote the letter, there was not a vintage left of the house. Mrs. Rich recalls they were burdened with sickness and poverty. At one time they had no meal or flour in the house. So goes the grandparents of this John Adams. My father used to call that wind pudding and air sauce. That's apparently what this man's grandparents had. A grandson of this John Adams was Victor Adams. He was a selectman of the town of Osterville for a good many years, and his wife was my first grade school teacher back during World War II. This John Adams also held the Blount cane. All right. Now we get into all this technology here. Yeah, I don't know how it works.
Also, just a water.
Take a coffee break. There we go. This is Freeman Adams and wife. They lived directly across from the school that was torn down on West Bay Road. Now, this Freeman Adams was the son, the oldest son of the previous John Adams. He also had cranberry bogs on Bumps River Road. The bogs now have been run down, and you'll get out Pond Street when it becomes Bumps River Road. On the right-hand side, you'll see some abandoned cranberry bogs. Well, I knew both of these people, and those cranberry bogs belong to this particular man. You know, we charge a fine if you're late.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
That's okay. All right. This is Bethel Adams and wife. They lived on Main Street between Midway Garage and the fire station. Now, if you go into the fire station, a little bit to the left of those big doors, there's a driveway. When you boat, you get out and back. Their house was situated right there. You're going to see a picture of it here in a couple of seconds. When I was a kid, the Eldridges lived in the house. This couple were married over 50 years. He was a trustee in the Methodist Church until his passing in 1900. Okay, the next picture. Okay, there's the house. If you know where the fire department is in Osterville, between that and Midway Garage, it's on fire department property. There's a driveway. Well, that's about where that house was. I remember it as a youngster. I used to take papers to it, but I didn't know this couple. They were long gone. All right, but that's where that previous picture, that's where those people used to live. All right. Okay, this is Watson Adams and wife, and they lived in-house, just taken down across from the post office. So there was a house on the east corner, is that right, Brett? Where the Shields lived? Yeah. Okay, it was just taken down recently. Watson Adams lived right across the post office. When I was a youngster, the Shields family lived there when I was much younger. Adams, this fellow here, served in the Civil War, but when he was in the service, he was living in Forestdale. When he ended the service, he married a West, which is an old Osterville name. They lived on Main Street. He married a West, and I presume that's why, because his wife was a West, and I presume that's how they came here to Osterville. All right. This is Captain Joseph Alley and wife. He was a sea captain. He died of tuberculosis, very common back then. It was called consumption. His wife was a Parker from the old Parker family of Osterville. She was probably born in the building which now houses the Osterville Historical Society. Now, when they were married and lived in Osterville, they lived across from what used to call Cumberland Farms. It's got some other name now. A fast little place on West Bay Road. They lived in the house where I go if I have to have blood work done. And years ago, it belonged to the Wheeler family. They had two sons and two granddaughters. One of the granddaughters was Edith. She married Ralph Williams of Osterville, and the other was Sarah Alley, and she married Carol Crosby of the boat building fame. Okay, next picture. That's the house. It was directly across from what I call Cumberland Farms, the beginning of West Bay Road as you come up by the Veterans Club. It's beyond the left. It's still there. It's been added on to, but that's the house. And that's where the Alleys lived. And then, of course, after they passed away, other people occupied the home. All right. This is a very old photograph. It's an old tintype. This is Thomas Ames and his second wife. They lived on East Bay Road, about the location, some of you probably can remember, of old East Bay Lodge. Most of the old Ames family of Osterville are descendants of this couple. It's very old. She was from one of the old Lovell families. Very, very old picture. All right. This is Josiah Ames and his second wife. A lot of these people were married not due to separation or divorce. A lot of these people were married 2 or 3 times. Either the man was lost at sea or the wife died at childbirth and all those things. He was a son of Thomas Ames. He lived on East Bay Road, came from a large family by his 2 wives. One of his children by his first wife, unfortunately, died of smallpox. And a little stone down here at the hillside cemetery. Most of the old Ames family of Osterville are descendants of him. All right. Now, this is Roland Ames. He's the son of the previous Josiah Ames. And he lived where the present Historical Society is now, the old Captain Jonathan Parker house. Now, he didn't build the house, but he lived there in the 1890s into the early 1900s. All right. Oh, that's the house. That's the house. That's the Historical Society. It's what they call a half house. It has a door and 2 windows. And a 3/4 cape would be a door, 1 window, and 2, and a full cape would be a front door and 2 windows on each side. And that barn, by the way, is still out there. It's where some of the old Crosby boats are. All right, that's where Roland Ames lived. Now, this is Thankful Ames. I don't know a heck of a lot about her. She's the wife of Granville Ames. Now, for many years, she was the manager years ago of the Cotter-Chesett House, which is now the Wiano Club. There is a reward given out in the village called the Thankful Ames Award. And I'm not going to put Kathy Wright on the spot, but she could probably tell you what it's about. I forgot what it was about. But I know Mrs. Rowland, Mrs. Carolyn Crossett Rowland, was the first person to receive this award. So maybe after the session today, Kathy, you could refresh my memory. But she was a manager years ago of what we call the Wiano Club. All right. This is Bradford Ames and his wife. He was lost at sea. in 1872 off of Cape Hatteras. His wife was a Parker. And if you people know Malcolm Crosby here in Osterville, he's still alive. These would be his great-grandparents. And he walks around, he still works down at the, he paints boats down at the boat shop. These are Malcolm's great-grandparents. At her folks' house, this was on the first fairway of the Wiano golf course. Of course, the house is long gone, but that's the house that she was brought up in. All right. All right. This is Alexander Bacon and wife. They lived on Parker Road. I don't know how well all of you know Osterville, but if you come in there by the flagpole and go down Parker Road, just beyond the big Alger building, his old house was just torn down. A shame. One of the old Osterville homes. Well, that was the home of Alex Bacon and his wife. As you can see, she was a Camet, another old Osterville name. They lived on Parker Road. House went to the dump within the last year. You can read about him in all these books here. His wife, as it says here, was a Camet. His great-grandson was the late Delton Hall. Now, I don't know how many here would know Delton Hall, but I knew him. He has two of his great-great-granddaughters were Betsy, Allison, and the twins, the Hall twins. But you could read about this fellow, Bacon, in my history books. All right. Oh, that's the house. Now this new house they built there, they tried to make the left-hand side of it look something like that. But that was the first house on the right, past the Alger building, is long gone, and the brand new house. There, it's all been landscaped, looks very nice. All right, that's where, this is Delaney West from an old Osterville family. There's no known picture of her husband. Now, I knew people, or talked to people years ago that knew her husband. He was a cobbler here in the village of Osterville. Now, she lived on Main Street, this side of the fire station. Very old house, it's still there, it has sort of a red front, a long place. And it says right there that she was a West from an old Osterville family, and again, her husband was a cobbler. All right. Okay, Clarence Baker. They lived on Parker Road. If you know which, you go down Parker Road, almost across from the Historical Society parking lot out back. There's a little teeny house sandwiched in there between these new monstrosity houses where Charlie and Ann Meads lived. Well, that's what this fellow lived, Clarence Baker. And his wife, he was the last Civil War veteran to pass away from Osterville. In fact, my grandfather, Chesbro, who I never knew, was a pastor, and according to the records, conducted this man's funeral service in 1931. All right. Now, this is Chester Baker. He was the son of the previous picture of, he lived in the same house where Charlie and Ann Meads lived, little teeny house tucked in there by these two huge monstrosity houses. He was a tinsmith, and he installed wood and coal stoves. That's how you heated your house years ago. So if you wanted any piping done to vent the smoke outside, he was the fellow that did it. Now, he had a grandson that I knew very well. He's passed away. His name was Chester Wyman. And Chester Wyman lived over in back of this new ball field that's been built. but he was named, Chester Wyman was named after his maternal grandfather. Okay. How are we doing for time?
It's 1:23.
Oh yeah, we're doing okay. This is Nelson Burse. Went to sea as a young man. Later ran and founded East Bay Lodge. I don't know how many of you people can remember East Bay Lodge, but it was on the right-hand side just before that little town landing I talked to you about that. This was the man and his wife who established East Bay. No, that's wrong. Go to the next picture. No, back up. Sorry, she copied it wrong. Don't tell Cindy that. All right, this is now their son, Nelson Burse, and wife. I wonder I didn't pick that up, but I didn't. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
His son, this couple's sons were the one that founded East Bay Lodge, and her father was Oliver Hinckley, and he built boats at the end of Bay Street. And eventually the house became into the Daniel family. And I went down there the other day. I couldn't believe it. The Daniel house was taken down, or the Hinckley house. And gosh, they built some huge houses in that area. But that's, his son was the founder of East Bay Lodge. His son went to sea. Okay. This is Otis Blount. Now you talked about the Blount cane. This is one of the sons of William Blount. And he was a police officer in Boston. Apparently, as he matured in life, he became a police officer up in the Boston area, but his remains are down here at the Hillside Cemetery. Okay. Now he had a brother. This is Luther Blount. If you ever go to either Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard on a ferry boat called the Uncantina, it was built by the Luther Blount maritime business down in Warren, Rhode Island. And this would be Luther Blount's great grandfather. This is a Luther Blount, born in Osterville. They were the sons of William and Eliza Blount. Luther was lost at sea in a terrific storm of 1863, bringing supplies to Union troops. You can read about this in volume 2. It shocked the village. There were others as well from Osterville who were also lost in the same storm. But that's Luther Hammond Blount, lost at sea in 1863. All right, next one. This is a very old photograph, very old. This is Rebecca Lovell Bolt. It's an old picture. She had triplets, only known set born in Osterville. Had her triplets while her husband was in jail. Now that sounds a little rough. I got to admit that. He was captured on the high seas during the War of 1812, and he was imprisoned over in England, her husband. But there's no known picture of him, and he died before photography was invented. Once home after the War of 1812 was over, once home, he came home, found out that his wife had 3 daughters, Mary, Martha, and Mercy. Her husband was a native of Amsterdam, Holland. You could read volume 2, all about them. And their grandson, a fifth generation grandson was Philip Leonard. Lived here in Osterville and used to run Leonard's Insurance Company, who passed away several years ago. All right. Now this is Sarah Bolt. If you people have my books on the village of Osterville, she was the granddaughter of the previous lady that you saw. And along with her friend, Minnie Cammett Allen, recorded lots of written history about Osterville from about the time of the Civil War on. And you could read about these things that she wrote about, articles about Osterville in the 3, especially this one and that one. There were articles. They were sort of like what I'm doing now, but they did all their writing back 1860, 1870 in that time frame. Well, that's one of the ladies, and then you'll see her friend who helped her. Okay. This is John Cammett, another old Osterville fellow. You can read about him and his whaling trip. He went over to the island, Nantucket, got on a whaling ship, and you can read all about his diary in this book here, volume 3. He was gone for 2 or 3 years, and some of his artifacts that he made are over at the Historical Society in Osterville. All right. Okay, now that picture I told you about, the lady that wrote Sarah Bolt, this was her friend, Minnie Cammett. She was married, but no children. Her last name was Allen, Minnie Cammett Allen, along with Sarah Bolt, kept many records. These ladies lived to be well into their 80s. I think Sarah Bolt lived to be 96. They kept many records of Osterville years ago, which has helped me. Minnie was a descendant, this lady here was a descendant of Benjamin Hallett. Way down at the bottom there. He was a Revolutionary War. Her great-great-grandfather was a Revolutionary War veteran from Osterville. They kept loads of records. Henry, okay, come on. Oh, that's her house. She married a man that was fairly well off. That's a side view. You get out West Bay Road, just before the corner that goes to the boatyards. It's the second house. It's past Eel River Road. It's the second house before the corner. If you went straight, you'd go into Crosby Yacht, go around the corner, you would eventually go to the town landing and then over the bridge. But that was her house, a fairly modern house. Her husband was quite well to do, I understand. All right. This is Minnie Cammett. This is Henry Cammett, brother of Minnie Cammett Allen. He was a blacksmith here in Osterville, long before my time. Years ago, he moved to the Midwest, Minnesota, and he manufactured automobiles. You can read about that in here. Once he retired, he returned to Osterville. I knew it. This is a funny thing to say, but he was the first person I ever saw in a funeral home. You might say, well, what were you doing at a funeral home? He was in a casket. Well, my mother, as some of you know, was in the florist business. So she brought a bouquet of flowers over, and I said, who's that fellow there? I know him. So she tried to explain it to me. I was about 10 years old. But that's Henry Cammett. Okay, the next person. Now, this fella here married a canon, Charles Tallman. He about froze to death on a schooner he was on, was wrecked off of the islands, Nantucket, I think it was the Martha's Vineyard. And he was on the schooner. The temperature was like it was about a month ago here, -3. His fingers had to be all taken off and his toes. The poor guy about froze to death. He was out in the ocean clinging onto a mast of a boat. And there's a picture of it in this book. And just 2 or 3 of them survived. You can imagine -3. No wonder his hands froze.
Yeah.
And he lived at the corner of Parker Road. There's a real estate office. Is it Robert Paul Real Estate? There used to be a house there. It's right across from where the flagpole is. So if you go down Main Street, go around the flagpole, there was a house right there at the corner. That's where he lived, and his wife was his wife was a Camet. I'm sorry, there's a picture of her in this book. It's not here, but that's a little bit about the history of Charles Tallman. All right. Okay, this is Captain Warren Camet and Persis Scudder. Now, Persis Scudder was born in that house, if you know where the bicycle shop is. Across from the flagpole. The next house, when I knew it, Helen McClellan, later John Alger. It's a colonial white house with a white fence around. She was born in that house, old Josiah Scudder house, and she married Warren Camet. And they also lived at the corner of Parker Road and Main Street. I'm pretty sure it's Robert Paul Real Estate, lived in that area. All right. This is Joseph Chadwick. He was married twice. I hate to say some of these things. His first wife went insane. That's his first wife right there. And apparently she had some mental problems. And you can read about them and some of the books. Then this couple, he and his second wife lived on East Bay Road, and his second wife was in Ames. The Ames all lived on East Bay Road years ago. And Joseph Chadwick, with his second wife, not this lady, had 2 children. I knew them both. It was Bertha and Philip Chadwick. And sadly, they didn't have any heirs. All right. This character here is James Codd. He was originally from Nantucket. He lived at the corner of Bay Street and Parker Road. So if you know where the country store, come down from Bay Street, turn by the flagpole, go down Bay Street. He lived right on the corner on the left-hand side of the Bay Street and Parker Road. One of his daughters married Oliver Coffin. Now, this fella here, his daughter, Eliza, she was 11 years old, was playing with a loaded pistol and accidentally shot and killed herself. That's years ago. That was this man's daughter. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, I read about it in the paper. You can go over to the Sturgis Library and read all the old Gospel Patriots. That's where I get a lot of this information from. Well, this poor fellow's daughter shouldn't have been playing with a loaded gun, but that's what happened.
Did he have other children?
Huh?
Did he have other children?
Yes. Yeah, there were other children, yeah. Okay. That's the houses. I used to take papers to this house back in the late 40s. John Atwood lived there. And he later built a house on West Street. That's Victoria. This is where that previous picture, this is where that fella, that's where he lived. And the house was, when I went there with a paper years ago, it was ready to fall apart then, but it went to the dump years ago. It was the first house on the left on Bay Street. All right. And that was his son, that guy was smoking the pipe. This was his son, Warren Codd. And that's his wife. I never was able to find out too much about Warren Codd. I was alive when he was. He had a step-granddaughter. I don't know if some of you know her. Her name was Geraldine Coffin. She married a fellow by the name of Edward Gresh. Geraldine Coffin Gresh. This was her step-grandfather. And they lived on West Bay Road and the corner of West Bay Road and Bay Street, where the Alger, I think it's called the Alger building, is. All right. Okay, this is Oliver Coffin and wife. He lived on Parker Road. If you came out of Sunset Lane onto Parker Road, the house was torn down to a lovely old house. It'd be to the left of Goodspeed's Insurance. That's where this Oliver Coffin, that's where he lived. They said he was well off and would loan cash to different people. I've heard this from other people. His old house went to the dump about 10 years ago, just to the left of Goodspeed's office. Mr. and Mrs. Wild, George Wild, lived in the house, but that's Oliver Coffin. All right. This is Tryphene Crosby Coffin. She had a twin sister called Tryphosa. This lady here married Joseph Coffin, but there's no known picture of him. Her mother, this lady's mother, was Tirzah. And she got involved somehow years ago in spiritualism. And this lady's mother was the one that told her two sons how to build a catboat. That's just as plain as I can say it. Her mother was a Tirzah Crosby. She was a sister of Horace and Worthington of catboat fame. All right. This is a very old Daguerrean, if you know what a Daguerrean picture is. They were bought tin types. They come in little frames. This fella went to the California Gold Rush. You can read about his travels. And he later built his house on Parker Road. It has a yellow, all the trim work is yellow. So if you go down Parker Road, be on the right-hand side before you would go down to the boat shops. And he also lived on Main Street for a while. If you look at the Veterans Club, if you're standing where the restaurant Wimpy's is and looked across the street, if there was a house to the left of the Veterans Club, he lived there as well. But he also built that house on Parker Road. It's got a yellow on the trim. Okay. This is Edwin Coffin, son of Joseph. His descendants his family still own that house I'm talking about with the yellow trim on, I don't think they lived there year round, but that's he was the guy that inherited that home. I don't know exactly what he did here in the village, but that's him. Okay. How do you like that fella? That's Abraham Coleman. They lived on Swift Avenue. His old home was later owned by the Swift family. But before the Swifts owned it, it was owned by this fellow. And I think that pond, as you go along Main Street and go past Swift Avenue, the pond that you can see on the left, I think it's known as Coleman's Pond. Max Crosby told me, even though Max didn't know this fellow, but he heard about him. Max didn't know Abraham Coleman, but this fellow knew how to kill a pig. Years ago, if you had to have a pig. My grandparents had pigs on Pond Street. And if you wanted your pig, you wanted to eat it through the winter months, this was one of the fellows that would do it. And then his son, William Coleman, he could do it. But he was sort of the guy, if you had pigs in the village, you wanted them slaughtered, that's the fella that you had. And Max told me that he was vicious with a knife. So that's all I know. Go ahead. That's his old home. Then the Swifts owned it later on, of course. That's long gone. Went to the dump. That house had lots of antiques in it. I went over there. The old Mrs. Swift was still alive. Gosh, the house, I don't know whatever happened to them all. The place was loaded with antiques. All right. Now, when we first started, I talked about the Adams who lived over here, just beyond where the school was. The old Mrs. Adams, and that's her. The old Mrs. Coleman wasn't Adams. And they lived on West Bay Road. Just go past where the school was taken down, this First Avenue, the first, second, third houses all belonged to the Colemans and the Adamses. This Mr. Coleman was in the express business. They had two sons, Irving Coleman and Cecil Coleman. And Cecil Coleman used to have a garage here in Osterville, down where the water department office is, where their parking lot is, but the garage is long gone. But he was the express man, so if you wanted to ship something by express from Osterville, he'd pick it up, he'd take it over to the West Barnstable Railroad Station. That's what this man did. All right. This is he had a younger brother, this man was Albert Coleman. He lived on Bumps River Road where Johnson's tree farm is. Now, he used to plow our garden. If you've ever been in my garage, I have a picture of him with his horse and team plowing our vegetable garden. He also had cows when I was young. He was one of the two men that I can remember whose main means of transportation was horse and carriage. He never had a car, he never drove. And once again, he used to plow our garden. Got the picture home with the horses, and he hit them with a whip, plow the garden. All right. That's not a very good picture, but that's Israel Crocker and White. Israel Crocker ran a grocery store right here. Kathy, what's the name of that real estate outfit?
Compass.
Kenland Grover.
Compass.
Huh?
Kenland Grover.
Kenland Grover. All right, thank you. His grocery store was right there, and his house the Israel Crocker house sat here where the library is. And he ran a grocery store in the center of the village where a real estate office is. And it burned down in 1954. I remember it very well. All right. That's the house. That house is right here where the library is now. And it was moved years ago over to First Avenue, sort of up and back, right across from where home plate would be in that new ball field. It's up and back there. That was Israel Crocker. Okay. All right, let's go to the next picture. Back up. All right, well, Israel Crocker had a son, Edward Crocker, and he used to live right next door here, where this, you call that thing?
Gazebo.
This,
Oh, the gazebo?
where the gazebo is.
Yeah.
The house was torn down, oh, maybe 15, 20 years ago. Edward Crocker lived there. And this is his wife, this is his first wife. And Edward Crocker ran the store, and to his father, same location. I can remember Edward. Home was next to library, taken down years ago, and a Mr. and Mrs. Bert Whistle lived there. She was a Hansberry, but the house is long gone. But that was Ed Crocker's first wife. Okay. Now this is Oliver Crocker. Now, I don't know too much about this particular family. If you go down towards the boat shop, West Bay Road, and you go between the second fairway, there's a green, and the third and the third tee. Right past that, before you get to Eel River Road, there's a driveway that goes in there. Well, that's where Oliver Crocker lived. Not far from the 8th tee of golf course. A fellow lives in the house now, he and his wife. His name is Sweeney, Neil Sweeney. I thought he might be here. But that's Oliver Crocker, and I don't know too much about him, but that's where he lived. All right. This is Clarendon Crocker and his wife. Now, he was a grandson of William Blount. Now, Blount was the fellow who left the cane to the village of Osterville. He inherited his grandpa, Clarendon Crocker. By the time he was 4.5 years old, he had lost both of his folks. He was an only child. No one ever knew what happened to his father. He completely disappeared. Some people say he might have been lost at sea, but we have no proof of that. So he inherited the Blount house, which is the last house on Main Street before Pond Street, a little white house. It'd be across the street from the fire station, diagonally across. Well, there's where he and his wife lived until 1883, and he later built a house on Pond Street where the Rankins. I don't know if you don't live here, you wouldn't know where that is, but that house is gone to the dump. And Mrs. Rankin happened to be a daughter of this particular couple. All right. This is Clarendon Crocker and his family. Now, if you were here the last time I talked, Clarendon Crocker had 2 other sons, and one of them was Otis. If you remember, I told you that Otis was the oldest of his. The father's in the middle, and the 2 daughters and the son. Well, Otis Crocker, Clarendon's older son, when he was in the 2nd grade, came down with scarlet fever. And it left him, he recuperated, took months, he left him what they called back then, and don't get after me for saying this, he left him deaf and dumb. Now, I remember Otis, the Clarendon's oldest son. And that's the way he talked, you know. That was a sign language. But I used to know him, and I knew these. In fact, I knew these people very well. I'm not ashamed to say, but that happens to be my grandfather standing in back. That's my mother's father. And of course, that would be my great-grandfather. All right. This is Chesbro Crocker. He was an oysterman. I can remember him going down Bay Street. I don't think back in those days you needed a shellfish license, but I might be wrong. He never drove. He was an oysterman all his life. He lived at the corner of Main Street and Blossom Avenue. The house is still there, and his granddaughter lives in it. June Crocker Smith. If you go by that house in the summer, Memorial Day, 4th of July, they always got a lot of flags on the front lawn. Well, that's Chesbro Crocker's house. All right. All right, we have the granddaughter here today of the girl on the right. This is Josephine and Esther Crocker. They were daughters of Henry Crocker, who once owned Fancy's Market after he got through going to sea. Esther, the one on the right, married Walter Fuller. And the granddaughter is here. And Mr. Fuller helped me a lot in the research of old Osterville. I was fortunate that when I started this project in 1959, there were a few people still alive that were born in the 1870s and 1880s, and I was able to get a lot of information off of them. And most of them, their minds were still very sharp. I don't know too much about Josephine, but I know she has grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They come over to the farmer's market at the museum in the summertime. But I know more about Esther's family. All right. How would you like that for a name? Oakshaw. This is Oakshaw Crosby. He lived on Parker Road. Now, I've mentioned this house because the Coffins inherited it or bought it. You go out the Sunset Lane out here, go down Sunset Lane, go right across West Parker Road, and you go into his old house. And the Coffins lived in it when I knew the house. Went to the dump. He ran a business. I don't know what type of a business, but he ran a business in a building just to the right of the house and garden where there's a building in there. He lived on Parker Road, and that's where he had a store there. I don't know what he did. All right. This is his son. He had a long name, William Willett Crosby. He was the son of that Oakshaw. I don't know exactly what he did, but it's too bad Peter Stringer isn't here. This fellow had a son. His name was Norman Crosby. I talked to him on the phone, but never had a chance to see him. He said, "You better come and see me because I'm getting old." And then he passed away. He lived off the Cape, but he married Dorcas. His son married Dorcas Stringer. And Peter's in the library all the time here. This would be Norman Crosby's father, and his son Norman was an uncle by marriage to Peter, and Peter's wife is here. All right. Well, this lady here had a very unfortunate circumstance in life. She was the wife of Worthington Crosby. And some of these things are hard to say, but this poor lady burned to death. Now you got to remember, back in those days, they wore, I don't know whether I should say these things, but they used to wear lots of petticoats.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with saying
You could say that.
I suppose to keep warm. All right, well, here's a wife of worthy because she burned to death when her clothes caught fire one morning as she was getting ready to cook breakfast. H. Manley Crosby, who lived next door, heard her screaming. Now, Max Crosby didn't know this lady, but Max told me that because his father told me. Heard her screaming on his way to the boat shop, but he couldn't do anything. And she passed away several hours after that. But this poor lady, that's how she succumbed. She was getting stuff ready to eat, breakfast, clothes caught on fire, and that was it. All right. This is Daniel Crosby and wife. And Beverly, this would be, the lady would be, as you can see, a relation to you. And Lisa here loves this lady's hairdo. Daniel was the son of Worthington. He built boats. I think most of his boat building was done on you go over the bridge. There used to be Quonset huts there years ago, the Chester Club. I think most of his boat building was there, but some on the mainland. But Daniel Crosby built boats, I think mostly on Little Island. He lived on Weano Avenue. You go past the Catholic Church parking lot is Scudder Road. That's where I live, down in there. The next house facing Weano Avenue is where that couple lived. And when my folks bought the land down in Scudder Road back in 1928, his descendants, along with a couple other people, were the heirs of all that piece of land. That was Daniel Crosby. His grandson was Shirley Crosby. He was the town electrician for years. And then his great-granddaughter was a Patricia Crosby Pemberton, something like that, but she's passed away. She was younger than me. But he was a boat builder, and that's where they lived. I think he was very successful. Go ahead. And they had a son, that previous picture, they had a son, Ralph Crosby. I never knew this fella. He lived off Cape. He was the son of Daniel. He was a naval architect. Lived on Weano Avenue in the second house past Scudder Road. It's all been added on to it. The third floor has a big round room like that. So if you go down Weano Avenue, go past Scudder Road, second house on the right before Hollingsworth is where that fella lived. Now, this fellow's granddaughter lives on Scudder Road. Her name is Gail Crosby Crafton. It's something like that. All right. Now, these are that previous Ralph Crosby. He had twins. There aren't too many twins that I've researched here in Osterville. I knew one of them, but I can't remember which one. The one I knew, her husband was president of a bank down in Provincetown. But those are the Crosby twins, and they were the daughters of Mr. and Mrs. I knew Mrs. Ralph Crosby, but I never knew him. Those were the Crosby twins, and you can see pictures of them as they matured in life in these books. We're almost getting to the end. All right. This was Charles Crosby. He was a brother of Daniel Crosby. He built boats along with his brother. He lived on Sunset Lane. This is Sunset Lane right out here. If you know where the former chief of police lives, the Nightingale, right across the street is quite a big house. There's where they lived. That's where this particular couple lived. Now, she was the last member of the Robbins family, an old Osterville family, to die. She's from a large family, and I could just about remember her. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. Years ago, when I was a youngster, you know, to make a few bucks, I used to cut grass and pull the weeds. And this Mr. and Mrs. Birtwistle, who lived right here next to where the casino is, they ran an antique shop uptown called the Good Luck Antique Shop. And now it's the Clean Waters. Zenas Crocker runs the place. It's just past the House and Garden. They were putting a new door in there the other day, but that's the story I want to say is that the Birtwistles ran an antique shop, and I used to take care of the yard, mow it, and cultivate the flowers. And one day, Mrs. Birtwistle came out to me and she says, "Paul, could you stay here for maybe an extra half hour and do something outside?" Because Bert, she called her husband Bert, we're going over to this lady's house right over here. And they were in the antique business. And they had, some of you people can remember these, they had two of these big clothes baskets made out of straw. I used to have one, but I sold it. That ladies used to put their clothes in, take them out the clothesline. So she says, "Could you wait here, Paul? And when we come back, you can help my husband bring these antiques out of these into the antique shop." And I said, "Sure." So if you go over, and I brought a beautiful stuff, all sandwich glass. And if you go over to the museum, Mrs. I no sooner brought the antiques in, and Mrs. Birtwistle called up Carolyn Fawcett Rowland. Now, she was a very nice lady. She helped me finance these books, I'll admit it. I had to pay her back. But she was also instrumental in contributing here to the library and other worthy causes in Osterville. But Mrs. Birtwistle went right to the phone, called her up while we were unloading all these beautiful pieces of sandwich glass. She came down bottom. And when Mrs. Rowland passed away several years ago, I'm just surmising, I can't prove it, that if you go in the Historical Society in the front room, there are the two windows that face Parker Road, with all these beautiful cut glass. And I'm almost willing to bet, because why would she left it to the museum, and she obviously knew where it came from. So I think that those beautiful pieces of cut glass and sandwich glass belong to that lady, and I helped bring them into Birtwistle's antique shop years ago. All right. Now this is a 4 generations. Hard to get 4 generations of photographs. The lady that I mentioned that had the antiques was standing. Boy, I wish I could knew that lady on the right. She was Benjamin Hallett's granddaughter. And she had, I'm sure she had a wealth of knowledge of Osterville way back into the early 1800s. But that's her. All right. Well, this one you've seen before. This is Horace Crosby. Can't say too much about it. He was a noted boat builder, and it was her sister that burnt to death. His brother was Worthington Crosby, and her sister was the one that burnt to death. We have a great-great-grandson of this guy right here, Horace. And if you see Malcolm Crosby, I've mentioned him before. This would be his great-grandfather. And he was one of the early builders of what's famously known today as the Crosby cat house. Okay, last picture, because I'm running out of gas. Well, this is one of Horace's sons, Herbert Crosby. He married a West, sort of. Cindy must have been shaken when she took that. Don't tell her I said that. He was a son of Horace, and he built boats down there at the boatyard. And if you ever knew David Crosby here in the village, maybe some of you did, some of you didn't. This would be his great-grandfather, Herbert Crosby. Then his great-great-grandfather would be Horace. All right, that's the end of the show. If you have any questions, don't come up here because my hearing isn't that good. If you have any questions, thank you.